Hey everybody, this week's video is on not screwing up your due diligence when you're buying rental property, because we sure as hell see a whole lot of investors not knowing how to do due diligence, buying a bad property, or getting lucky that they didn't buy a bad property because they don't know how to do due diligence. We take some very thorough steps to understand our property even before someone sees the property for us, since we buy everything from out of state and remotely, just to make sure that our investors are protected and we're offering them a consistent product with the least surprises possible, because surprises always happen with rentals, but we want to minimize those. This video is going to give you an outline. Get your pen and paper out, take some basic notes. It's just going to be some bullet points for you. That way you can have kind of a checklist for due diligence when you consider any property, whether you're looking at our rental property, which is all pretty high cash flow stuff, so you should check it out on our website, or whether you're buying rental property somewhere else. So let's get started. Here's how it works. Okay, the first thing that we do when we have a property or a seller come to us is, well, we get the address, we get the type of property it is. Is it a single family home, a duplex, a fourplex, an eightplex? The bed bath breakdown per unit with unit numbers attached to them, so we have traceability later on. We also want to know the square footage of the property. It helps us understand the value of the property and the market rents potentially as we do our analysis later on. And you also want to get the information on its garages if it has them, and basement space, because these are potentially income producing spaces that you should also take into consideration. Once you get the basics, you're kind of in pre-qualification mode here, right? You don't want to spend hours analyzing a property that's going to be nothing, so you want to look at the most important thing first. And the most important thing you're going to ask about is the financial situation of the property. Financials are the reason we buy rental property, so of course you want to get it out of the way. Make sure it's a deal. So you want to ask the seller what it's renting for on all units per unit, so you could break it down and attach it to the unit traceability map that you kind of created, right? Unit 1's renting for $700, it's a 2-bedroom, 2-bath. Unit 2's renting for $800, so on and so forth. Get all the rental information, ask the seller if they think they're under renting, and then remember later to do some market research and get potential rents, because that's going to be a big factor in your decision as well. How much increase can you get here, and what's the path to increase? How difficult is it going to be? The next bit of financial information you want to get from the seller of a property is going to be the utilities, right? It's the only thing we ask sellers besides their actual rents. That's because utilities are a freaking pain in the ass to trace down sometimes. You got to call the utilities company, you got to know the metering situation. So we ask the seller, how many electric meters, where does each one go? How many gas meters, where does each one go? And how many water meters, where does each one go? Which ones are you paying for? What utilities are you paying for in total? And how much are you paying for water and garbage and sewer? How much are you paying for gas? How much are you paying for electric, if you're paying for any of them? And now you got to ask them a harder question. Once you get the utility stuff and the rents, you want to know what they want to sell it for, right? So that way you can actually stick it into your pro forma once you get the other expenses that you research online that we'll go over in a second here, and see if the cash flow meets your criteria. Do you need a 10 cap? Well, you need all the financial information and a sale price to know if the property's a 10 cap or not. So get the price from them, really get it out of them. It's going to be extremely important. Everything else can be had online. Taxes should be looked up on the county assessor's website for this property. Get the actual tax amount that the seller of the property is paying. Some counties have a practice where the sale of a property triggers reassessment, so you want to know if they do that or not. Estimate the taxes as accurately as possible using actual county data. You also want to know what you're going to pay in insurance. This is pretty straightforward, folks. You might have an estimate because of previous properties that you've insured that are similar to this one, or you could just contact your insurance provider and say, hey, just give me a basic quote here. Right? It doesn't take very long for them to email you back. Plug in management information or management cost into your pro forma. Plug in your vacancy rate that you estimate for the area, and that could be attained by a commercial lender's information database, or just kind of your rule of thumb, or whatever you get from a property manager. I like to use 5% in high rental demand areas. You can use a little bit more if you want to be safe. Also plug in your maintenance reserve and your CapEx reserve for a really nice property. 10% is what we put out there. Conservative people might want to use a 15% maintenance reserve, including CapEx on a property. Stick it all in your pro forma, including the sale price and the rents, and see what you get on this property. Does it check out? If so, move on to the next step of due diligence. Okay, the next thing we do is we call the seller back and we start asking questions about the tenants, because this gives us a better idea of what we're gonna have to do to stabilize this property, because ultimately, folks, rental properties are a business and your customers are these tenants. So you have to manage people to make your income. It's not as passive as everybody thinks. So understanding the tenant situation is really important. The first thing you wanna know about the tenant situation is, well, are they under leases? And we don't care if they're not under leases, folks. People freak out about month-to-month leases sometimes. I don't at all. Honestly, I prefer them because they're flexible and we can take over and start to make changes. Regular leases are gonna basically tell you, hey, you're locked into these terms with these tenants. You can't make any changes till it's over. So you wanna know the lease end dates as well. You also wanna know how long a tenant's been living in the property. That's gonna help you understand if they can afford a rent increase, which actually the following questions feed into as well. Okay, you wanna know the number of people in the property. You wanna know if it's a family. Who is it? Mom and pop, single person, retiree, family with a lot of kids, family with a couple kids, family with a couple kids and several dogs. And then you also want to find out if they're clean or not, right? And just straight up ask the seller, say, hey, we're going to verify this, but it's important for us to know if these tenants are taking care of their unit, because the cleanliness of the unit is going to have an impact on how much work you have to do if they move out. And it's also going to basically impact your motivation levels to keep a tenant versus not keep a tenant, because you don't really want to spend a bunch of money turning a unit unnecessarily if these tenants move out and the unit wasn't in good shape. You want to know the tenant's income source. Are they making their money from working jobs? Are there multiple people working jobs in the house? Do they have Section 8 rents? Are they on Social Security? Their income source and the nature of their income from that source is going to help you understand if you can raise rents. You also want to just straight up ask the seller, when's the last time you increased rents on these tenants, and can they afford an increase? You'd be surprised. We've talked to thousands of sellers over the past couple years that we've been doing this, and they're very upfront about this. They'll tell us, yeah, these guys are due for an increase. I haven't raised it in a while. I just kind of don't care. I want them to stay around and not bother me, and they're good tenants, so I don't. But they can afford it. They need an increase. They wouldn't move out. And then other people go, no, they can't afford it. They'd probably leave if you increase the rent more than $25 or so. That's really valuable feedback for your property manager when they take over the property. One last little bonus question you want to ask about the tenants is, do they own their own appliances? Because if they own their own washer, dryer, stove, refrigerator, which is not terribly uncommon in some of these areas. I would say most of the time the landlord owns it, but sometimes you see tenants bringing their own. You're gonna have to replace all those, because we don't like to offer units without appliances. It shrinks the tenant pool that we have access to, so we prefer that the landlord owns the appliances, or we factor that cost in, because we may have to replace those appliances when the tenants move out. Once you've got all the tenant stuff out of the way, you can get into the condition. Now, you're gonna do a third-party inspection later, but you don't wanna waste your time, effort, and money in the inspection without getting the information preliminarily, right? So you wanna go ahead and talk to the owner of the property or whoever you're buying it from, whether it's a realtor, hopefully you're not doing that, or the property manager that's attached to it, and you wanna know about the major components first. The first major component you're gonna ask about is the foundation, because sometimes foundations need a little bit of work, and it's not a big deal, guys. A little bit of foundation work, reinforcing one bowing wall that's bowing 3-4 inches in, that's not that scary. That's a $2,000 job in most cases for us. But a wall that's crumbling or major cracks that are a 1/4 inch thick or severe water seepage, those might be signs that you have a $30,000 repair on your hands. And I would never buy a $100,000 duplex that needs a $30,000 repair. It's just not worth enough to substantiate investing that much money into a property like that. The next thing you want to ask about is the roof. You want to understand if it's a flat roof or a pitched roof. You also want to know the age of the roof, whether it's flat or whether it's pitched, and you want to know when the last replacement took place, what was done. Was it just another layer added on, or was it actually shingles torn off, or the flat roof torn off and fully redone, new plywood, all that, because that's going to give you an indicator of how much lifespan is left in the roof. You want to ask about siding, but I just kind of brush over this. If it's a brick building, ask if it needs any tuck pointing, which is when the bricks need to be kind of replaced and restructured and reinforced a little bit. That could be expensive. And if it's a frame building and it's going to have vinyl or aluminum or wood shingle siding, you want to ask about just the general condition of that siding and if it needs anything, because a tear off is usually unnecessary, but if it really needs to happen, it can be kind of expensive and it's not a job you want to do. Windows are really important. They can be pricey. You want to know the type of window you're dealing with on the property. Are they wood windows, which are the least desirable? Are they aluminum windows, which are slightly better? Or are they vinyl dual pane windows, which are pretty nice? And you want to ask them kind of how many of each, right? They don't have to know the exact number, but have you replaced any windows? Is it all vinyl? Is it partial? And the ones that are older that aren't vinyl dual pane, are they going to need replacement soon? Do they open, close, and stay open when they are open? Because that's going to be a determining factor in whether you can get a Section 8 tenant. A window that doesn't stay open does not pass the Section 8 inspection. If you happen to be going for Section 8 tenants, then you're not going to be able to offer that property to them. You have to replace that window. And guess what? If you have a regular tenant, which we do in many of these properties, actually in most cases we have non-Section 8 tenants, you still don't want to offer a property that's windows don't stay open. Ask about electrical. This is the most important internal component that we deal with, because if it's not upgraded from whatever old wiring system it was, aluminum, knob and tube, to the current copper Romex wiring system, that could be a very expensive change that you'll eventually have to make when that older wiring starts to deteriorate. And in many cases, that older wiring is not considered safe, and insurance companies don't like it either. So if it's got a full knob and tube system throughout the property, an upgrade could be on a fourplex like 20 grand, because they've got to tear out drywall, rewire the whole thing, and then put all that drywall back up in all 4 units, every freaking outlet in the house, every appliance, every major component like furnaces and water heaters that have an electrical component to them. They're all going to need to be rewired. You also want to ask about the breaker boxes. Just make sure you have breaker boxes and not fuse boxes on the property. These old fuse boxes don't even have switches. They're literally fuses you stick in and out of this fuse box to kind of break the circuit. They're dated, they're usually code violations, and they're about 2 grand each to replace, and that's pricey. Don't sweat plumbing so much. If you have an older property with older plumbing and the plumbing's not having severe issues with water pressure and pipes aren't bursting left and right, then yeah, I wouldn't really say it needs repair, right? You don't repair things that don't need replacement, that aren't negatively impacting the property. Most of the time when you have older plumbing, you just kind of rip out sections as they start to leak or cause low pressure and replace them with the newer types of plumbing, which are usually PVC or copper. Older plumbing is usually galvanized pipe, it's steel pipe, and it does deteriorate over time, right? But that's not something I would really sweat if a property had it and not updated copper plumbing throughout. Now, one thing I would sweat quite a bit is HVAC in a property. Now, in these Midwestern properties, they're usually colder environments than they are warm environments, and tenants usually bring window AC units, so you don't have central AC too often, but you do have heating units pretty often. They're either furnaces or boilers in most cases. Both of these are gas operated. Sometimes you find electric baseboard heat, which really sucks because it's expensive and very inefficient. Usually the tenant has to pay for it, and it raises their bill quite a bit, and they move out, so you have to charge a lower rent. But furnaces last about 15 to 20 years, and I would say when they're well maintained, closer to the 20-year side. Boilers, which basically boil water and create radiant heat that's blown through ducts to heat all the units, are usually found in multifamilies, and they usually service multiple units per boiler. And those things last about 50 years when they're maintained well. And they can go out earlier sometimes. We had an unfortunate situation where like a 25-year-old boiler went out recently on a property, but I've never seen that before. Usually 40 to 50 years is pretty common when they're maintained. Both of those things could be expensive to replace, furnaces and boilers. So you just want to make sure you know the age, and you also want to know the age of hot water heaters. They're not that expensive to replace, but if you've got 5 of them in a 5-unit property and they're all like 15 years old, they're approaching the end of their lifespan, that's going to be $800 each to replace. When it comes to these mechanical components though, furnaces, boilers, hot water heaters, you are really going to want to milk the use of a quality home warranty plan, one that you read all the fine print on so you make sure they don't try to back out over pre-existing conditions and stuff like that. But if you've got older mechanical components of the property, oftentimes the utilities company in the region that you're buying property in will offer a per appliance warranty that you could purchase just for the older ones for like $10–12 a month for $2,500 in coverage. Finally, the last thing you want to look for is cosmetic condition. I try not to nitpick sellers on cosmetics unless it needs a full kitchen, which is a ton of work, or bathroom replacements, and if it needs them in all units. If you've got 1 bathroom but the kitchens are pretty good in all the units, then I'm not going to try to make a big deal out of it. it's not going to stop me from getting better rents. A lot of the times cabinets can be preserved and bathrooms can be preserved even though they're a little dated, just by making sure they're clean and well maintained. But take a look at kitchens and bathrooms. Take a look at flooring. Flooring doesn't have to be replaced unless it's absolutely terrible. You can clean carpet many times and you can refinish hardwood floor. And usually kitchen floors, you just stick some laminate down that lasts for a while. Or you stick some vinyl planks like Allure flooring that's really durable in like the kitchen and the common areas like the living room. Yeah, you're gonna invest a little bit of money in it, but it's gonna last a very long time. I wouldn't really worry too much about cosmetics. I would just look at overall cosmetic condition. The one thing you do want to consider with cosmetics is look at your tenant situation. If it looks like a lot of your tenants are under renting, not great tenants maybe, may not want a rent increase, and their units are in cosmetically poor condition, you're not going to want to bump rents on them very aggressively all at the same time, because if you're buying a fourplex where all the tenants are paying $500, they should be paying $750, and all the units need cosmetic remodels, well, you don't want to absorb 4 cosmetic remodels at once while you have vacancies. Do that gradually over time. So that's all you guys are doing to get the information you need about a property, but you've got to verify all this information too, right? So these steps are where the real due diligence starts. You gathered everything you need to know, and now you got to make sure that no one's bullshitting you. First thing you want to do is you want to call the utilities department and the water department in the region that you're purchasing the property and get 12-month historic usage records on all the meters where utilities are owner paid. So that way you know exactly what kind of gas bill, electric bill, and water bill you're going to have. You're not just taking the owner's word for it, and you're getting an idea of what it's going to be in the winter, what it's going to be in the summer, and what it's just going to be overall. Get the right number here for your pro forma. You also want to call the city's building inspection department and ask them if the property is a legal blank. So if someone told you it's a fourplex with a basement unit, and it's supposed to be 5 units, you want to call and say, hey, is this a legal 5-unit building? And if they say we have it registered as a 4, go, well, I've got a basement unit in here. Is it likely to be grandfathered? Is it going to be a code violation? And they say, no, we have no open code violations against the property. They give you some feedback and go, we frequently see grandfathered basement units here, and it is allowed as long as they're up to spec. Then you're probably good on that, especially once the inspector goes through and takes a look, and you can ask the inspector specifically about a suspected grandfather unit that the city can't verify. So call the city, make sure it's a legal property of whatever type it's supposed to be, duplex, triplex, fourplex, etc., and make sure there's no code violations against it. Next thing you're going to want to do is get that insurance quote. You already had an estimate earlier. You might have already gotten a quote yourself just because you couldn't estimate the number off the top of your head, but just go and verify that. Maybe shop a couple different companies. You want to make sure your numbers are right, so get an insurance quote. Now this next part is extremely important. Once you're under contract with the seller, you want to collect rent roll that's going to tell you the tenant's name, their contact info, when they first moved in, and their lease end dates. You're going to want to get operating statements for the property, which are basically a report from the seller saying, this is what I reported on my tax return for my income and expenses on this property for the last 2 years and year to date. This one's not as big a deal. You can figure these numbers yourself based on the research that you've done here since you've been so thorough. Now, what is important is getting the leases. You want to see exactly what these tenants have in their terms and the prices to verify the information the sellers told you. And if they don't have leases, even if they do have leases actually, you're going to get something called an estoppel letter, where the seller goes to every tenant before the sale is completed and gets them to sign a letter saying, this is still my rent, this is still the deposit that I turned in, I'm agreeing to it. I'm agreeing to the fact that I do or do not own these appliances, and that my lease end date is this date, or I'm on a month-to-month, whatever it is. So that way you can hand your property manager a package of tenant information that's going to give them a clean start to transition into this property with, and not a big fat headache where the tenants are playing a he said, she said, oh no, your information's incorrect, I'm actually paying less, I'm actually paying more, I actually had a bigger deposit. You don't want to deal with that nonsense. Now finally, after you get that, you're going to go ahead and order a third-party inspection. Now you can do this simultaneously while you gather leases. You don't want to be a freaking headache to the seller of this property and say, I need all this documentation before I even move forward. Show them you're serious. Order the inspection at the same time while you're getting all the documentation, as long as they seem honest and nothing is suspicious about the situation overall, or more suspicious than usual about the situation. Go ahead and order a third-party inspection. When you get the results, look over them. Compare them to the information that the seller provided you with when you were talking to them about the major components of the property. Don't nitpick them on little stuff. No one wants to work with someone that's going to complain about GFI outlets that need to be redone, or loose ground, or a smoke detector that needs to put in, or a light bulb that's out. That's bullshit. You're never going to get deals if you're going to nitpick things that are not that important. Look at the major components, compare them to the inspection report, look at the marginal items on the inspection report, call the inspector who performed the inspection and ask them about the severity of the marginal items, because language on inspection reports can be scary because the inspection company is protecting their own ass. However, a lot of the times the stuff that they put in there is not as concerning as the wording makes it sound. So talk to the inspector. They're usually a whole lot more human over the phone. Ask them about the nature of the repairs it needs and any other questions you might have. Finally, the last thing you want to do is, well, if you're buying this thing with a bank, there's going to be a third-party appraisal, and this is going to verify the value of the property. There's really nothing you can do here. Just sit back, take a look at the appraisal, make sure the property's worth what you think it's worth, and you're good to go. Move on with this transaction. So that's kind of a look into what we do. This is all information we gather before even offering a property to our investors. We're extremely thorough, so our investors don't have to do this degree of work. However, we encourage them to verify everything that we've sent in. But be thorough, gather information in the correct order so you're not doing unnecessary work, and just don't leave any blind spots open, guys. This could be risky if you're buying rental property, especially out of state without seeing it. Make sure that you're doing it correctly and give yourself the peace of mind of gathering all the info so you don't have question marks floating around in your head over and over and over and over for the first couple years of ownership. Be prepared for the surprises that may occur so you feel good about your investment property, the income it generates, and your stabilization plan. That's all. Hope you took some good notes. Apply this to every purchase, and go ahead and shoot me a comment if you've got any questions on any of these detailed items, because I know I went over a lot of information. Hit subscribe, show me some love. I'm trying to get to 1,000 followers as quickly as possible here. I'm boosting these videos. It's not working as quickly as I want it to, but that's fine. I'm gonna keep providing good information. Follow us on Instagram, follow me on BiggerPockets, go to our website and opt into our email list for actual properties in your inbox, because all of our deals are cash cows. And let me know if you've got anything you want to talk about regarding out-of-state investing. I'm an open book, and we've got lots of experience from the trenches for you.